Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 22nd of September of 2024. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about some updates that are coming from the territory of Russian Federation. Right in front of your screens you can see the satellite picture of the test site. And according to information we have during the previous few days, probably a few days ago, Russia tested Sarmat missile, and as you can easily see, the Sarmat test ended in complete failure. The rocket exploded in the mine, leaving a huge crater and destroying the test site. The first and the last successful test of Sarmat took place on April 20 of 2022, so more than 2 years ago. So now that these events have become official, this is at least the fourth failed attempt to use the combat heavy Sarmat missile. So once again, since the beginning of use of this missile, the Russians made 5 test launches, and as you can see, just one was successful and 4 of them were completely unsuccessful. And this is very important piece of news because the Russians began testing this system once again. So the question is why the Russians began testing this type of weapon. Before we receive answer to this question, let's discuss in details once again the consequences of attack. As you can see, there's a combination of different satellite pictures. There was a test site and then a heavy explosion inside of mine and the consequences of this explosion. I'll remind you that during the previous few days since the beginning of 15th of September, the Ukrainians made significant number of missile attacks. The Ukrainians are saying that the Ukrainians are using the drones to attack Russian warehouses and ammo depots, but as I understand, the Ukrainians began using cruise missiles of the Western production that may be even invisible for the Russian air defense. And as you can see, as a result of attacks, the Ukrainians destroyed significant number of very powerful ammo depots, very big ammo depots, and some Ukrainians are saying that the Russians have munition, shells, missiles, rockets, drones on these warehouses for 2 or 3 months of clashes without stop. So you know that's the entire line of combat contact, starting from, let's say, the Sudzha direction till the Kherson direction, can fight in 3 months of clashes without any stops, without any operational pauses, which means that these ammo depots that were destroyed by the Ukrainians were very big and very powerful. Another explosion took place in the southern part of Russia, in the Krasnodarsky Krai. So let's take a look at this video once again. Very heavy explosion as a result of secondary detonation. So before continue moving further about Sarmat missile, I would like to remind you that these 2 ammo depots is not a very big deal for the Russians. For example, we have some open data that we can find in Wikipedia, and according to open source, the Russians have thousands of these missiles, of ammo depots, and the most important, the Russians have thousands of these mines that they can use for Sarmat launching, so it's not a very big problem. The most important thing is that the Russians began testing this, and most likely, once again, Sarmat is not just nuclear carrier, it's just the primary target, the primary goal of this system, to carry nuclear weapons somewhere as far as possible in the western direction through the Atlantic Ocean and so on. But the sources are saying, and this we can find this information in the internet, that the Russians created additional military package, military warhead for this Sarmat, and this package and this warhead has the name of Avangard. So this is not nuclear warhead that has equivalent of 800 kilotons up to 2 megatons, and other sources are saying that these Avangard missiles, Avangard systems can be used without even explosive warhead at all. So this is kinetic missile, and if this kinetic missile, Sarmat missile with the Avangard warhead attack, let's say, some building or some territory, it has the energy of equivalent to 18 tons of TNT. which is a lot. For example, if we compare this Sarmat system, let's say, with the Kinzhal system, the most powerful Russian missile. So Kinzhal system has its energy, it's with the 500 kilos, let's say, warhead, has energy of 1 ton of TNT. And Sarmat has 18 tons of TNT equivalent. So it's according to open source that we can find in the internet. So just imagine yourself that the Russians began testing the hypersonic missiles that 18 times more powerful than Kinzhal. 18 times more powerful than Kinzhal. And obviously the Russians can use this without nuclear warhead. And as I understand, this is the answer, and this is exactly what the Russians are planning to do on the territory of Ukraine during the next few months if Ukraine receives official authorization from the Western country to attack deep inside of Russia. The Russians are not going to use nuclear weapon. They will use nuclear carrier, but with a kinetic warhead, with the purpose to deal as much as possible damage and just to show the Western countries the real Russian possibilities. Because if ever nuclear war starts, first of all, and first thing you need to be sure for 100% is not the number of warheads, nuclear warheads you have, but the most important question you need to answer yourself, whether you have carriers that can bring nuclear weapon on the territory of the opposite side. And now the Russians began testing the carriers, and this is very important. Now let's go to the line of combat contact. We have additional changes on the ground. We have some changes in comparison with the previous video. Let's discuss in details. Once again, the Russians began full-scale offensive operation with the purpose to encircle the city of Vuhledar. The Russians during the previous few days managed to cross the river Kashlygach, and as a result of clashes during the previous 24 or 48 hours, the Russians managed to improve their position significantly and to reach as close as possible Vuhledar from the western direction. So we have some mappers. For example, according pro-Russian mappers, we have some lines, and if we summarize everything we've been receiving for the previous 24 hours from different pro-Russian mappers, this is approximately the territory that was additionally taken by the Russians as a result of clashes. So significant progress, as you can see, and currently the distance between possible Russian edge positions to the west of Vuhledar and Vuhledar itself is less than 4 kilometers, and the Russians are planning to move further in the northeastern direction. We haven't received anything about additional progress on the ground in the vicinity of Vadiana, but a lot of sources reported that the Russians do have some progress and that the Russians are moving in the direction of Bogoyavlenka. So once again, there are going to be no clashes for the city of Vuhledar. The Russians will take this city in pincers. They will try to encircle and to create a cauldron, or to force the Ukrainians to fall back towards Bogoyavlenka. Now let's move further. Let's talk about Kurakhove, and the situation in this area is very difficult. The sources from different brigades from this direction report about critical situation and about nightmare and hell on the ground. The Russians, as a result of fast lightning attack, managed to establish complete control over the Selidove prison number 82. There are some doubts how exactly the Russians were attacking, from the northern direction or from the eastern, but it doesn't matter, telling the truth. The Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to get as close as possible to Kurakhove water reservoir. Obviously, the next step is to secure the territory, to secure Maximilianovka, and to attack Kurakhove itself, and to attack the village of Ostrivske. If the Russians are able to get this line, to reach this line, this is going to be complete disaster and complete collapse of the armored forces of Ukraine in this direction, with the creation of a cauldron for the armored forces of Ukraine inside of Nivolskoye cauldron. During the previous 24 hours, we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were bombing the cities in the base of Nivolskoye cauldron. We're talking about Kurakhovka, we're talking about Zhelana Druga, we're talking about this village of Gornyak. Very heavy artillery strikes, which confirms or show us something like artillery preparation before the beginning of the full-scale ground offensive. Now let's move further. We have additional updates from the area of Selidove. The Russians, after a very long operational pause. And if you remember, we started a few days ago, a few weeks ago, probably a week ago, we started receiving updates that under the Ukrainian pressure, the Russians were forced to fall back from the southern part, from the eastern, and we started changing map back in Ukrainian favor. But starting of the 20th of September, the Russians finished their regrouping and began another wave of a full-scale offensive in the south and the southeastern part of Selidove. And as a result of clashes, the Russians took under control this stronghold. The Russians managed to semi-encircle the coal mine and to reach the southern outskirts of Selidove. And most likely the Russians will be able to take the city of Selidove by the end of October, or maybe even earlier. As for Novogrodovka, the Russians continue improving their positions in the western direction, in the northern direction, and furthermore, some Russian sources reported that as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish complete control over the village of Mykolaiv and Krasny Yar. Just yesterday, we got reports that the Russians took the village of Krutoy Yar, and now we have additional possible progress on the ground. And the sources, once again, the pro-Ukrainian sources reported that the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt to the west of Grodovka and to move in direction of Mirnograd and Pokrovsk. Now let's talk about Toretsk, New York agglomeration. We received the most important video exactly from this territory. The Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to take under control the village of Lyubimovka, Leonidovka. We have video with very good quality. In this video, we can see Russian BMP, a personal carrier that entered the village. The Russian BMP was attacked by a Ukrainian FPV drone. We can see the Russians landed, the Russian troopers landed in the area and began securing the process. They secured the territory completely and later additional reinforcement arrived. Based on this video, a lot of mappers have adjusted their maps in Russian favor. Now let's move further. As for the city of Toretsk itself, there are very heavy clashes on the territory of the heart of this citadel, but the Russians are about to finish, and there are just 30% left, and around 70% were already captured by the Russians. Now let's move further and let's talk about the area between Klishchiivka and Zinopolye. Today we got a lot of videos of how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainian positions along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal, and for the previous 3-4 days we received a lot of updates that the Russians, as a result of clashes, managed to secure this territory completely. We're talking about this part of the territory between the village of Klishchiivka, Andreevka and Seversky Donetsk-Donbass canal. Yet we haven't received any geolocation that can confirm this, but I believe that maybe by morning video, by the next video, some reliable sources will adjust their maps, or we're going to receive additional geolocations and we will adjust the map as well. Now let's move further. As for the Kupyansk direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and to take under complete control the village of Nevskaya. Furthermore, we have additional changes on the ground according to different Russian, mainly pro-Russian sources, and the Russians are saying that as a result of clashes, the Army Force of Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the fields, over the constructions along the river of Zhiribets. So currently, according to pro-Russian sources, this territory is already under complete Russian control. So I believe that there are still lots of job to do to secure the territory, because the Russians, according to pro-Russian sources, managed to capture this territory too fast. There are still a lot of things to do. Furthermore, according to the same sources, the Russians managed to cross the river of Zhiribets and to take under control the village of Lyubimovka. And this is more interesting piece of news. So as you can see, now the Russians have two places where they managed to cross the river of Zhiribets, to the west of Nevskaya and to the west of Makeyevka. And as I understand, now the main purpose and the main goal of the Russians is to improve their positions on this side of the river, to take additional fields fortifications, and then the Russians will move further in the western direction towards the villages of Redkadub and Karpovka. So these villages are very important, because if the Russians are able to reach this line, let's say to take under control everything that located, let's say, along this white line, then the Russians will be able to cut supply that goes from Koptilovka and Oskil. The Ukrainians still have possibilities to support their forces in this area using this road, and the Ukrainians can still support their forces from Slaviansk and Liman. done. So by taking under control the villages of Malievka, Ritka-Dub, so this territory the Russians will be able to cut the central Kupyansk direction, first from the northern direction and from the southern direction. As for the central Kupyansk direction, the Ukrainians have significant problems in this area. The pro-Ukrainian sources, Deep State, confirms that the situation is very difficult. The movement of the armored force of Russian Federation in the direction of Barova-Kupyansk, Vuhledar Kupyansk highway, which is the main logistic road in that area, continues. At the beginning of the occupation of Peshchany, the Russians first continued to attack in the direction of Kolesnikovka and then to the north, reaching the Heights. But having met resistance, they began to look for another vector of movements and found a weak spot in the lowlands towards the Krugliakovka, where they had their last success. So this is the village of Krugliakovka. This is it, and this is exactly where the Russians are moving. As for this direction, the Russians have just one purpose, one goal: to cut the territory in two. So to reach the river of Oskil, it doesn't matter where exactly the Russians are able to do this. They can attack in direction of Glushkovka, in direction of Kolesnikovka. As the first step in this direction, they need just to reach the river. And now let's see if the Russians are able to improve their positions along the line Makievka, Ritka-Dub. If the Russians are able to reach the village of Krugliakovka, then the entire Kupyansk direction will be cut in three: the southern, the central, and the northern. And after that, the Russians will handle with every single one separately. Most likely the first direction is going to be the central one, then the northern one, and the final one is going to be Liman, the Liman direction, which can this operation can start maybe in the end of this year or at the beginning of 2025, and then the Russians will reach the city of Slaviansk once again. Now let's move further. Let's talk about the Sudzha direction, where the Russians continue their offensive. We still haven't received anything that can confirm Russian control over the villages of Darina or the control over the village of Nikolaeva Darina, and furthermore we haven't received anything that can confirm Russian progress and the Russian presence into the west of Sverdlikova. We have no doubts that the Russians managed to get these lines, but of course we are waiting for additional updates. The Russians during the previous 24 hours published just one video of how they were attacking the northwestern forests of Lyubimovka. As a result of attack, the Russians managed to reach the lines, defense belt, to land the infantry and to begin clearing operation. We don't know for sure the current status of this forest, but currently the main clashes are taking place exactly for this territory. The main Russian purpose to secure the forest and then to move further in the eastern direction. The Ukrainians will not count losses, but they need to hold the lines. If the Russians are able to go through the forest, then the Russians will be able to make additional step to the creation of the Sudzha cauldron. And on the 25th, 26th of September, we're going to have a meeting between Zelensky and Joe Biden. So most likely the most difficult and the most heaviest hit days are going to take place on the 23rd and on the 24th. So two next days are going to be very important and vital and decisive for both Ukrainians and the Russians. Furthermore, we continue receiving updates from Martinovka. This territory is under very heavy fire. We have significant number of geolocations since the beginning of this month. An additional batch of explosions we got during the previous 24 hours, and based on some explosions, some Russian aviation attacks, we have adjusted the map, as you can see, in Ukrainian favor. We're talking about this line. We have video that shows a significant number of Russian aviation artillery strikes on Ukrainian positions. Now let's move further to Glushkovo area. The Ukrainians were completely defeated. They haven't managed to achieve any results. The only thing they managed to do is to bring FPV operators closer to the line of combat contact, and during the previous day we got a lot of videos of how the Ukrainians were FPV droning the Russians on the territory of Glushkovo itself and along the road. For example, in this video we can see Russian reinforcement that was heading towards Vysole but was ambushed and destroyed by the Ukrainian FPV drone attack. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.